Most people walk through life believing they understand human nature. They believe they know what drives loyalty, what builds friendships, what sustains love, what creates respect. They believe people are mostly good, mostly rational, mostly fair. That belief is the first illusion, and illusions are dangerous, because the moment you believe people operate according to kindness, fairness, or moral consistency, you become predictable. Predictable people are easy to manipulate, easy to pressure, easy to control. The world is not governed by the stories people tell themselves. It is governed by deeper forces: instinct, fear, status, survival. Centuries ago, Niccolò Machiavelli observed something that most people still refuse to confront, not because the evidence is hidden, but because the truth is psychologically uncomfortable. Human beings are not driven primarily by virtue. They are driven by advantage. You see it everywhere once you remove the mask. The colleague who praises you publicly but quietly competes for your position. The friend who celebrates your success until it begins to outshine theirs. The partner who claims unconditional loyalty until a more advantageous option appears. This is not rare behavior. This is baseline human behavior. Machiavelli understood that people prefer to believe comforting lies about themselves. They want to see themselves as honorable, compassionate, principled. But beneath that self-image lives a far older operating system, one shaped by survival across thousands of years of social conflict. In primitive environments, status determined survival. Higher status meant access to resources, allies, protection, and mating opportunities. Lower status meant vulnerability, scarcity, and exposure to threat. That ancient hierarchy never disappeared. It simply became more subtle. Modern society hides it behind politeness, laws, and etiquette, but the underlying machinery remains the same. Humans still scan constantly for power, weakness, advantage, and threat. And this leads to the first dark truth about human nature that most people are too afraid to see. People do not respect kindness. They respect power. This is where most individuals make their first fatal mistake in social strategy. They believe that generosity creates loyalty, that patience earns respect, that fairness guarantees cooperation. But human psychology does not work that way. Kindness without power signals vulnerability, and vulnerability activates predatory instincts. You may not want to believe this, but observe carefully. The person who constantly accommodates others, the one who always says yes, the one who avoids confrontation, the one who tries desperately to be liked, that person is rarely respected. They are tolerated, used, sometimes even pitied. But respect does not emerge from submission. Respect emerges from perceived strength. Machiavelli captured this reality with brutal clarity. He wrote that it is far safer to be feared than loved when you cannot be both. Most people misunderstand this statement. They imagine cruelty, tyranny, aggression. That is not the point. The point is psychological leverage. Fear stabilizes behavior. Love does not. Affection is conditional, emotional, unstable. It fluctuates with mood, circumstance, and convenience. But fear is precise. Fear creates boundaries. Fear defines consequences. The human mind is wired to avoid loss more strongly than it seeks gain. This principle governs nearly every social interaction you experience. When someone believes there are no consequences for disrespecting you, ignoring you, or exploiting you, their behavior slowly drifts toward opportunism. Not because they are evil, because they are human. Most people operate like water. They flow toward the path of least resistance. They push where resistance is weak. They withdraw where resistance is strong. Strength reshapes behavior. Weakness invites pressure. This is why individuals who attempt to build their lives around approval slowly lose control of their environment. They negotiate constantly, they appease constantly, they sacrifice their boundaries piece by piece, and eventually they feel invisible. Meanwhile, the individuals who understand power dynamics operate differently. They are calm, measured, difficult to intimidate. They communicate one silent message through their posture, tone, and decisions. There are limits here. Cross them, and there will be consequences. This subtle perception shifts everything, because humans are extraordinarily sensitive to hierarchy signals. Tone of voice, eye contact, pace of speech, reaction to pressure, willingness to walk away. These cues determine who becomes predator and who becomes prey. And once a role is assigned, most social groups reinforce it unconsciously. Which brings us to the second truth, a truth even darker than the first. Because once you see it, you will never look at loyalty the same way again. Loyalty is one of the most romanticized ideas in human culture. Stories glorify it, movies worship it. People swear by it as if it were some sacred force binding human beings together through storms and temptation. But Machiavelli observed something that few are willing to say out loud. Loyalty is rarely permanent. It is conditional. People do not remain loyal because of promises. They remain loyal because, in that moment, loyalty serves their interests. This is the second dark truth about human nature, and the sooner you understand it, the sooner you stop being blindsided by betrayal. Humans are masters at disguising self-interest behind noble language. They speak of values, principles, friendship, love. But beneath those words lies a silent calculation constantly running in the background of the human mind. What do I gain here? What do I risk here? What options do I have if I leave? Most people never consciously acknowledge this calculation. They believe their own narratives about devotion and integrity. But when pressure appears, real pressure, the hidden equation suddenly becomes visible. History is filled with examples. Alliances collapse the moment circumstances change. Business partners abandon one another when profit shifts direction. Political allies become enemies overnight when power rearranges the board. Machiavelli did not see this as a flaw in human character. He saw it as a law of nature. People are loyal to stability, to protection, to opportunity. When those things disappear, loyalty weakens. You see this clearly in social hierarchies. A rising individual attracts supporters quickly. Admiration gathers around visible momentum. But the moment that person's power begins to decline, something fascinating happens. The crowd becomes quiet. Supporters disappear one by one, not always dramatically, often gradually, subtly, like animals drifting away from a weakening leader in the wild. This behavior is not conscious cruelty, it is evolutionary instinct. Humans evolved in groups where attaching oneself to a losing position could threaten survival. Aligning with strength increased security. Aligning with weakness increased danger. Your brain still carries this ancient wiring, and so does everyone around you. This is why the most effective strategists never rely on loyalty alone. They build structures where loyalty becomes the safest option. They create environments where remaining aligned with them produces stability, while betrayal produces uncertainty. Powerful leaders throughout history understood this deeply. They did not demand loyalty through speeches or emotional appeals. They engineered systems where loyalty was reinforced by incentives and consequences. Because people do not remain faithful to promises, they remain faithful to outcomes. Halfway through this conversation, you should pause for a moment and make a decision. If these ideas are already sharpening the way you see human behavior, then you understand something important. Information like this is rare, and clarity like this compounds. So make the simple move that signals you want more of it. Like this video and subscribe, not because someone asked politely, but because you recognize the value of seeing the world without illusions. Now return your attention to the deeper pattern. When people believe loyalty is guaranteed, they become careless. They stop reinforcing relationships with power, competence, and value. They assume emotional bonds are enough to secure allegiance, and that is when betrayal becomes possible. Machiavelli warned rulers repeatedly about this mistake. A prince who assumes loyalty without maintaining strength eventually invites rebellion, not always because he hates him, often simply because the balance of power shifts. Human beings adjust quickly to new opportunities. If someone stronger appears, if someone wealthier appears, if someone offers greater security, the mind begins to rationalize movement. The betrayal is justified internally before it ever happens externally. This is why strategic individuals never build their world on blind trust. They build it on leverage. Leverage is the invisible architecture of loyalty. It ensures that remaining aligned with you continues to serve the other person's interests. Without leverage, loyalty is merely hope, and hope is not a strategy. But this leads to the third truth, a truth even more uncomfortable than conditional loyalty, because it reveals something darker about the human mind. Not just how people behave, but what they secretly enjoy watching happen to others. There's a darker layer beneath human behavior that most people spend their entire lives pretending does not exist. It is not just that loyalty is conditional. It is not just that respect follows power. It is that human beings are quietly fascinated by the downfall of others. Watch carefully, not what people say, what they react to. Success attracts attention, but failure attracts something stronger: curiosity, energy, conversation. When a powerful figure collapses, people lean closer. When a respected individual makes a mistake, whispers begin immediately. When someone loses status, the room becomes strangely alive. This is the third dark truth about human nature. People are drawn to weakness. Not always consciously, not always maliciously, but the human mind is deeply sensitive to status shifts, especially downward ones. When someone falls, the social hierarchy trembles for a moment, and in that moment, every observer begins silently recalculating their own position. Where do I stand now? Am I above them, equal to them, still below them? The collapse of another person creates psychological opportunity. That is why public scandals spread so rapidly, why rumors move faster than facts, why failure travels through social circles like electricity. The mind is scanning for signals about power. Predators watch carefully when another predator stumbles, because weakness changes the ecosystem. Machiavelli understood that reputation is one of the most fragile forms of power. It takes years to build authority, competence, prestige, but the moment doubt appears, the perception of strength begins to fracture. And perception is everything. Once people believe someone is losing control, their behavior toward that person subtly changes. Conversations become less respectful. Boundaries are tested more aggressively. Compliance weakens. It happens gradually at first, then all at once. This is why Machiavelli warned rulers to guard their image relentlessly, not out of vanity, but because reputation determines how others calculate risk when interacting with you. If people believe you are strong, they hesitate before challenging you. If people believe you are weakening, they begin exploring how far they can push. The shift is almost invisible, but once it begins, it spreads through the group like a quiet signal passing between minds. Humans evolved in tribes where identifying vulnerability quickly could mean the difference between survival and danger. That instinct never disappeared. It simply moved into modern environments, offices, friendships, relationships, politics. You may believe your social world operates on fairness and goodwill, but beneath the polite surface, every person is constantly observing signals of dominance and weakness. Who speaks confidently? Who hesitates? Who apologizes too often? Who defends themselves poorly under pressure? These signals build a silent ranking system inside the minds of others. And once a person is mentally placed lower in that hierarchy, reversing the perception becomes extremely difficult. This is why strategic individuals understand something critical. They control the narrative around their strength. They do not expose uncertainty casually. They do not advertise internal conflict. They do not collapse emotionally in environments where predators are watching. They remain composed, measured, unreadable. Because once the perception of weakness spreads, it triggers a chain reaction inside the social group. Testing begins. Subtle disrespect appears. Authority erodes. And people who once supported you begin quietly distancing themselves from what they now perceive as a declining position. Now, consider something carefully. If this observation feels uncomfortable, that is exactly the point. Most people prefer to believe that others celebrate your success purely out of goodwill, that friends remain happy when you rise, that colleagues support you without envy. But human nature is more complex. People admire strength. They align with it. And sometimes, when that strength collapses, they feel relief. Before we go further, answer one simple question. When you look at the people around you, friends, co-workers, even family, have you ever noticed how differently they treat someone after that person loses status? Comment below. Now, keep that observation in your mind, because the fourth truth goes even deeper. It exposes the silent mechanism that allows manipulation, propaganda, and social influence to control entire groups of people. And once you understand it, you will start seeing how easily the human mind can be directed without ever realizing it. This fourth truth is the one that powerful institutions have understood for centuries, while ordinary individuals continue to underestimate it. Human beings do not respond primarily to truth. They respond to perception. Facts matter far less than the story people believe about those facts. And once a narrative takes hold inside the human mind, it becomes extraordinarily difficult to dislodge, even when evidence appears directly in front of them. This is not a flaw of intelligence. It is a feature of how the brain protects its sense of stability. The human mind hates uncertainty. It hates cognitive chaos. When a clear story is offered, one that explains events, assigns heroes and villains, and simplifies complexity, the brain accepts it eagerly. The story becomes a psychological anchor. Once that anchor drops, perception begins filtering reality. People stop asking what is true. They begin defending what feels consistent. Machiavelli recognized this dynamic long before modern psychology could explain it. He understood that controlling how events are interpreted often matters more than controlling the events themselves. A ruler who wins a battle but loses the narrative may appear weak. A ruler who suffers setbacks but controls the story may still appear powerful. The difference lies in perception. Human beings rarely investigate deeply. They rely on signals, headlines, tone, confidence, repetition, social agreement. When enough voices repeat the same interpretation, it begins to feel like truth. And once a belief becomes socially reinforced, individuals become extremely reluctant to challenge it, because challenging the narrative risks isolation. Humans fear social exclusion more than factual error. That fear shapes behavior in quiet but powerful ways. People sense what opinions are safe to express. They detect which viewpoints carry social protection and which ones invite criticism. So they adjust. They echo the dominant story. Not always because they fully believe it, but because alignment with the group preserves status. This is why propaganda works. This is why rumors travel faster than corrections. This is why individuals with confidence and authority can reshape public perception with astonishing ease. The mind does not evaluate every claim like a scientist. It evaluates them like a tribal member deciding where safety lies. Who sounds certain? Who appears powerful? Who already has supporters? Those signals guide belief more than logic. Once you understand this, you begin to see why arguments based purely on truth often fail. Truth alone does not persuade. Truth must be wrapped in perception strong enough to compete with existing narratives. Strategists know this. They do not simply present facts, they shape interpretation. They influence the emotional framing around information. They guide attention towards certain details while allowing others to fade into the background. The mind fills in the rest. Most people are unaware that this is happening to them constantly. They believe their opinions are purely rational conclusions, but those opinions were quietly influenced by tone, repetition, authority, and group pressure long before conscious reasoning appeared. This is not limited to politics or media. It operates in everyday life, in offices, in friendships, in relationships. If someone successfully frames you as unreliable, others begin interpreting your actions through that lens. If someone frames you as competent, the same actions are viewed as leadership. Perception rewrites reality. And because humans rely so heavily on social cues, the first version of a story often becomes the permanent one. That is why those who understand power move quickly when narratives begin forming. They do not allow damaging perceptions to circulate unanswered. They reshape the interpretation before it hardens into belief. Weak individuals argue endlessly about facts. Strategic individuals control the story those facts exist inside.
The final truth about human nature is the one most people resist the hardest, because accepting it forces a painful realization about how easily the human mind can surrender its independence. Human beings crave certainty more than freedom. Not in theory, in practice. Ask someone if they value freedom, and they will say yes immediately. The word itself carries heroic weight. But watch how people behave when uncertainty enters their lives, when rules disappear, when authority fades, when responsibility for decisions falls entirely on them. Something uncomfortable begins to happen. Anxiety rises, confusion spreads. People start searching for someone to tell them what to do. This is the fifth truth about human nature. Most individuals are not seeking autonomy. They are seeking guidance that feels safe enough to surrender to. And this need has shaped the structure of societies for thousands of years. From kings to political leaders, from religious authorities to corporate hierarchies, systems of power have always understood the same psychological pattern. If you offer people clarity, direction, and a sense of order, many will accept your authority willingly. Not because they are weak, because the burden of navigating chaos alone is psychologically exhausting. Freedom requires responsibility. Responsibility requires uncertainty, and uncertainty forces the brain into constant decision-making. Most people do not want to carry that weight forever. They prefer a framework, a structure, a set of rules that tells them where to stand, what to believe, and who to follow. Once that structure is accepted, control becomes remarkably simple. Authority figures rarely need to force obedience. They simply maintain the perception of stability and confidence. The human mind fills in the rest. People police themselves. They defend the system that provides them psychological security.
This is why individuals who challenge established narratives are often met with hostility, not necessarily because they are wrong, but because they introduce uncertainty, and uncertainty threatens the comfort of belonging. Machiavelli recognized this pattern clearly. Power does not rely solely on force. It relies on the human desire for order. A leader who appears decisive and stable becomes a psychological anchor for those around him. People gravitate toward that anchor, not just for protection, but for relief. Relief from the exhausting responsibility of navigating the world alone. This realization leads to the final and most important shift in perspective. Once you see these truths, how respect follows strength, how loyalty follows advantage, how perception shapes belief, and how certainty attracts obedience, you begin to understand the hidden architecture of human behavior. You stop interpreting the world through comforting illusions. You start observing the real forces that move people. And that observation gives you something rare: clarity. Most individuals will never examine human nature this deeply. They will continue believing that intentions matter more than incentives, that narratives matter less than facts, that loyalty is permanent, that status is irrelevant. But now you know better. And knowledge like this changes how you move through every social environment. You recognize when someone is testing boundaries. You recognize when narratives are being constructed. You recognize when loyalty is shifting. And most importantly, you recognize how easily perception can reshape reality. This awareness does not make you cynical. It makes you prepared. Because the world is not governed by the rules people claim to follow. It is governed by the patterns people unconsciously obey. And the moment you understand those patterns, you stop reacting to events blindly. You begin predicting them. That is the difference between those who drift through power structures and those who quietly learn how they operate. If this kind of thinking resonates with you, then you already understand something about yourself. You are not looking for comfort, you are looking for clarity. And clarity attracts a certain type of mind, the kind that studies power instead of pretending it does not exist. So if you intend to keep sharpening that perspective, if you intend to keep seeing the psychological mechanics most people ignore, then make the decision that signals you belong in this circle of observers. Subscribe, not for entertainment, for understanding.